Military boots echoed across the cracked concrete as two uniformed officers stood at the girl's front door. Neighbors watched in silence. Inside, her hands trembled as she clutched an empty breakfast tray. She had only ever carried kindness to one lonely old man, never imagining it would lead to this moment. Every morning before school, 12-year-old Amara balanced a small tray in her hands, 2 slices of toast, a boiled egg, and a cup of warm tea. She walked 3 blocks to the weathered house at the corner, the one most people passed without looking. Mr. Harold lived there alone. His porch sagged, his mailbox leaned, and his windows stayed dark even in daylight. Amara knocked gently every day, never loud, never rushed. When he opened the door, his eyes always softened, as if her presence reminded him of something he feared he'd lost forever. "Morning, sir," she'd say with a shy smile. "You're an angel, child," he'd reply, voice rough but kind. Amara never stayed long. She left the tray, asked how he felt, and listened, really listened. He told her stories about the past, about days when life had meaning and people remembered his name. She never knew exactly why he lived alone or why his hand sometimes shook. She only knew that no one else came. Her mother never asked where the extra food went. She already knew. Kindness in their home didn't need explaining. Amara started bringing breakfast after noticing Mr. Harold sitting on his steps one cold morning, staring at nothing. He hadn't asked for help. That was what hurt the most. She remembered how her grandmother used to say, "The quiet ones are usually the loneliest." So she acted, not because she wanted praise, but because ignoring him felt wrong. Over time, Mr. Harold began to talk more. He spoke about loss, friends who never came back, letters that stopped arriving, and a life that had once been full of purpose. He never mentioned details, only fragments, as if the memories were too heavy to carry whole. Amara listened anyway. At school, kids teased her for being late sometimes, for smelling like old houses and tea. She never explained. Some kindness is sacred, meant to be protected from noise and judgment. Each morning, she watched his hands tremble less as he ate. Each morning, his smile stayed a little longer. And each morning, Amara walked away believing she was doing something small, never realizing that even the smallest kindness can echo louder than anyone expects. One morning, Mr. Harold didn't answer the door. Amara knocked again, louder this time. Her chest tightened. She imagined the house swallowing him whole. Just as panic rose, the door creaked open. He looked weaker, thinner, but when he saw her, his eyes filled with tears. "I didn't think you'd come today," he whispered. "I always come," she said softly. He invited her to sit for the first time. The house smelled of dust and memories. On the wall hung old photographs, young men in uniform, smiles frozen in black and white. Amara stared but didn't ask. "You remind me of someone," he said quietly. "Who?" "Someone who saved me without knowing it. That day." He pressed a folded note into her hand. "In case something happens," he said. Amara didn't open it. She didn't need to. Her heart already understood the weight of his words. When she left, she felt a strange heaviness, as if the world was preparing to change. The next morning, sirens filled the street. Amara froze halfway down the block. Police cars, neighbors whispering. Her breath caught as she saw the old house surrounded. Fear wrapped around her chest like wire. Later that afternoon, the knock came at her own door. 2 military officers stood outside, faces solemn, posture rigid. Her mother's hand tightened around Amara's shoulder. "Are you Amara Lewis?" one asked. She nodded, barely able to breathe. "We need to speak with you." Her mind raced. Had she done something wrong? Had kindness somehow become a crime? The officers stepped inside, their eyes softening when they saw the breakfast tray on the table. "You've been visiting Mr. Harold Thompson," the officer said. Amara's voice trembled. "Is he okay?" The room fell silent, and in that silence, her childhood innocence held its breath, unaware that the truth about the lonely old man was far bigger than she had ever imagined. The officer took a slow breath. Mr. Thompson passed away early this morning. Amara's world shattered. The tray slipped from her hands, clattering to the floor. Tears came fast and uncontrollable. She had planned to bring breakfast. She had promised she always would. But, the officer continued, kneeling to her level, "There's something you need to know." He pulled out a worn photograph, the same uniform from the wall. Mr. Thompson was a decorated war veteran, a man who saved dozens of lives, a man who received honors but lost everyone he loved. Amara shook her head, sobbing. He was just lonely. The officer nodded. "And you were the only one who saw him." They handed her the folded note. Inside were simple words. "Because of you, I remembered who I was." Outside, neighbors watched in silence. That day, Amara learned that kindness doesn't just comfort the living. It redeems the forgotten. The news spread through the neighborhood faster than anyone expected. By evening, a quiet crowd gathered near Mr. Thompson's house. People who had lived beside him for years, but never truly seen him. Amara stood close to her mother, clutching the folded note like it might disappear if she let go. Military vehicles lined the street, their presence heavy, solemn. An officer gently explained what would happen next. Mr. Thompson would receive full military honors. Amara struggled to understand how the lonely man who waited for her every morning was also someone the nation remembered as a hero. In her mind, he was still the man who smiled at toast and tea, who listened when she talked about school, who thanked her like she'd given him the world that night. Amara cried quietly in bed. She felt guilt claw at her chest. What if I had come earlier? What if I had stayed longer? Her mother held her tightly and whispered, "Some people don't need saving. They just need to be remembered." For the first time, Amara realized that kindness didn't always change the ending, but it changed the meaning of everything before it. And somewhere deep inside, she felt that Mr. Thompson had not left this world feeling alone. The day of the funeral arrived under a gray sky, heavy with unspoken respect. Rows of uniformed soldiers stood in perfect alignment, their presence both overwhelming and awe-inspiring. Amara felt small walking between them, her shoes sinking slightly into the grass. She had never been to a funeral before, especially not one like this. As the flag-draped casket was carried forward, her breath caught. This was the same man who had once struggled to open his door, whose hand shook as he lifted a cup of tea now. The world stood still for him. During the ceremony, a commanding officer spoke of bravery, sacrifice, and honor. He spoke of battles fought, lives saved, and courage beyond measure. Amara listened, tears streaming freely. None of those stories mentioned breakfast trays or quiet conversations, but she knew those moments mattered too. When the final salute was given, the sound pierced her heart. She flinched, instinctively reaching for comfort that no longer existed. But then, a soldier stepped forward and knelt before her. "He talked about you," the soldier said softly, "more than anything else." In that moment, Amara understood something powerful. Heroes aren't just shaped by war. Sometimes they are healed by love. After the funeral, Amara was invited to stay behind. She sat in a quiet room with officers who treated her not like a child, but like someone important. They told her about Mr. Thompson's life after the war, how he struggled to reconnect, how the silence followed him home, how the world slowly forgot him. He stopped believing he mattered. One officer said gently, "Until you." Amara stared at her hands. "I just brought breakfast." The officer smiled sadly. "You brought dignity." They gave her a small wooden box. Inside was a medal and a letter Mr. Thompson had written weeks before his passing. He had asked that it be given to the little girl who reminded me I was still human. The letter spoke of mornings he waited for, of footsteps he learned to recognize, of hope returning in quiet ways. He wrote about how her kindness helped him sleep without nightmares, how it softened memories that had haunted him for decades. Amara wept openly, realizing her simple routine had healed wounds she never knew existed. Kindness, she learned, doesn't need permission to change lives. It just needs to show up. Life slowly returned to routine, but Amara was no longer the same. She still walked those 3 blocks every morning, but now she paused at the empty house. The porch remained quiet, the door forever closed. Yet somehow, it no longer felt abandoned. At school, her teacher shared Mr. Thompson's story with the class. The room fell silent. Students who once teased her now watched with respect. Some even apologized. Amara didn't feel proud. She felt humbled. That afternoon, she noticed something new. A classmate sat alone, staring at the ground. Amara hesitated, then walked over and sat beside her. No words at first, just presence. She understood now that loneliness wears many faces, and kindness, real kindness, doesn't ask questions or wait for recognition. At home, Amara placed a medal beside her bed. She didn't see it as an award. She saw it as a reminder. Every small act matters. Every unnoticed effort carries weight. Mr. Thompson had been a hero in uniform, but at his final chapter, he had been a man saved by compassion, and Amara had been part of that story. Months later, Amara stood before a small group at a community event. Her hand shook as she spoke, but her voice was steady. She told them about breakfast trays, quiet mornings, and a man who needed to be seen. She didn't speak about medals or military ranks. She spoke about listening, about showing up. People cried. Some hugged her afterward. Others promised to check on neighbors they had ignored for years. The ripple had begun. That night, Amara returned home and opened the folded note one last time. The words felt different now, not heavy, but warm. Because of you, I remembered who I was. She whispered back into the quiet room. And because of you, I learned who I want to be. Outside, the world continued its noise, but inside her heart, something profound had settled. Love had outlived loss. Kindness had outlasted loneliness. And though Mr. Thompson was gone, his legacy lived on, not just in medals or ceremonies, but in the quiet courage of a young girl who learned that compassion can turn ordinary mornings into miracles. Weeks passed, but the story of Mr. Thompson didn't fade. If anything, it grew. Letters arrived at Amara's home, handwritten notes from veterans, neighbors, even strangers who had heard what she did. Many shared their own loneliness, their own silence. Amara read each one slowly, realizing how many people lived unseen lives just beyond familiar doors. One letter stood out. It was from a former soldier who had served with Mr. Thompson decades earlier. He wrote about a night in combat when Mr. Thompson carried him across enemy fire, refusing to leave him behind. He saved my life, the letter said. I wish I'd saved him from being alone. Amara cried quietly after reading it. She understood now that even heroes can be forgotten, and that being remembered doesn't always come from grand gestures, but from simple consistency. At school, Amara started a small kindness club. No announcements, no posters, just actions. Students volunteered to check on elderly neighbors, write letters, bring meals. It didn't feel like a project. It felt like a responsibility. Amara carried Mr. Thompson's memory with her, not as sadness, but as purpose. His loneliness had ended, but through her, his story was still teaching others how to see. One afternoon, Amara's mother found her sitting on the porch with 2 plates of food. "Who's coming?" she asked gently. Amara hesitated. Mrs. Collins, 2 houses down. She lost her husband last year. Her mother smiled, not surprised, not worried, just proud. Mrs. Collins cried when Amara knocked. Not loudly, quietly, the kind of cry that comes from being remembered. They ate together in silence at first, then with laughter. The pattern felt familiar. Healing often does. That night, Amara dreamed of Mr. Thompson. He stood on his porch, strong again, smiling the way he did when she brought tea. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. She woke with peace instead of pain. Amara realized something important. Grief doesn't disappear. It transforms. When carried with love, it becomes action. When honored, it becomes legacy. She placed the wooden box back under her bed, not to hide it, but to keep it safe. Some reminders are meant to be close, not displayed. In quiet moments, she still missed him, but she no longer felt the ache of regret. She had shown up, and sometimes that's everything. A year later, a small plaque was placed on Mr. Thompson's old house. It read, "Here lived a man who served bravely and was remembered." Amara stood in the crowd, holding her mother's hand. She didn't speak during the ceremony. She didn't need to. The story spoke for itself. As people slowly dispersed, a young boy tugged at her sleeve. "Is it true," he asked, "that you brought him breakfast every day?" Amara nodded. "Why?" She thought for a moment. Because no one else was. The boy frowned, then nodded like he understood something new. That night, Amara wrote in her journal. She wrote about fear, the fear of knocking on doors, of caring too much, of losing people. And then she wrote about courage, the courage to care anyway. Mr. Thompson had taught her that love doesn't guarantee happy endings, but it guarantees meaningful ones. She closed the journal with a quiet smile. The world still had lonely people, but it also had her, and now others like her. Years passed. Amara grew older, but the lesson stayed. She volunteered, studied, listened. She chose paths that kept people from disappearing quietly. On her graduation day, she carried the medal in her pocket, not for luck, but for grounding. When her name was called, she thought of an old man opening a door, surprised someone remembered him. After the ceremony, an elderly veteran approached her. "You don't know me," he said, "but I knew Harold." They stood in silence together. 2 generations connected by one act of kindness. "You gave him peace," the man said. Amara shook her head softly. "He gave me purpose." That night, she sat alone and reread the note one final time. The words no longer felt like goodbye. They felt like a beginning. She understood now. Some people enter our lives not to stay, but to shape who we become. Mr. Thompson had lived many lives. Soldier, survivor, forgotten man, and in the end, someone loved. Amara never forgot the sound of military boots at her door. What once felt like fear had become a reminder of how unexpectedly kindness can echo. She learned that compassion doesn't need permission, that dignity can be restored in quiet ways, that showing up day after day can change the ending of someone's story, even if it doesn't change the outcome. Most of all, she learned that being seen is sometimes more powerful than being saved. Mr. Thompson left this world knowing he mattered, and Amara carried that truth forward, offering it to others who needed it most. Kindness had shaped her childhood. Purpose would shape her future. And somewhere in the stillness of memory, an old man smiled, remembered not for his medals alone, but for the mornings when a young girl knocked on his door and chose love. The house on the corner didn't stay empty for long. The city restored it carefully, preserving the porch where Mr. Thompson once waited each morning. It became a small community space, nothing grand, just warm. Veterans met there. Neighbors talked. Silence was replaced with presence. Amara visited often. She ran her fingers along the doorframe, remembering how it used to creak open, how his eyes would light up at the sight of her. She realized then that places absorb emotions. Love leaves fingerprints even after people are gone. One afternoon, she found a notebook tucked into a drawer. It was Mr. Thompson's. Inside were short entries, dates, brief sentences. She came again today. Breakfast tasted like hope. I am not invisible anymore. Amara pressed the notebook to her chest and cried, not from sadness, but from release. She understood now that kindness doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it sits quietly beside someone, day after day, until their world feels safe again. Mr. Thompson's final chapter wasn't defined by loneliness. It was defined by connection. And that truth wrapped around Amara like a promise. What we give with sincerity never disappears. It transforms. As Amara entered adulthood, people often asked what inspired her path. She never mentioned awards or recognition. She spoke of mornings, of consistency, of knocking even when no one answers right away. She worked with communities others overlooked, elderly veterans, forgotten neighbors, people slipping through cracks too wide to notice. She listened more than she spoke. That had always been her strength. Sometimes she felt overwhelmed. The world carried so much pain. On those days, she remembered Mr. Thompson's smile. Not the sad one, but the grateful one. She learned an important truth. You don't have to heal everyone. You just have to show up for someone. One night, after a long day, Amara sat alone and whispered into the quiet, "I hope you're proud." In her heart, she felt the answer. Legacy isn't built in monuments. It's built in moments repeated until they become meaning. And Amara carried that legacy forward, one person, one knock, one act of compassion at a time. Years later, Amara returned to the neighborhood with her own child. She stopped at the familiar corner, now bright with life and laughter. Children played where silence once lived. Her child asked, "Why do you always smile here?" Amara knelt and said, "Because this is where I learned who I am." She told the story simply, not of medals or soldiers, but of breakfast trays and kindness, of how love can exist without reward, of how choosing to care can change both the giver and the receiver forever. Her child listened carefully, eyes wide. That night, Amara watched them fall asleep and realized something profound. Kindness doesn't end with one generation. It travels, quietly, faithfully. Mr. Thompson's story lived on, not just through her, but through everyone she taught to see. And somewhere beyond memory, his loneliness remained gone, replaced by a legacy he never asked for, but deeply deserved. On the anniversary of Mr. Thompson's passing, Amara returned alone. She placed a small breakfast tray on the porch, toast, an egg, and tea. She sat beside it, breathing deeply. "I kept coming," she whispered, "just like I promised." There was no sadness in her voice, only gratitude. She realized that love doesn't disappear when people leave. It settles into who we become. It shapes our choices. It teaches us how to stay human in a world that often forgets. Amara stood, leaving the tray behind. Someone else would find it. Someone else might need it. The cycle would continue. Because kindness, once released, never belongs to just one story. Amara walked away from the house one last time, sunlight warming her back. She felt light, not because the pain was gone, but because it had meaning. She had learned that the smallest acts can restore dignity, that remembering someone can save them in ways medicine never could. Mr. Thompson had been many things, but in the end, he was a man who was seen, and she was the girl who chose to see him. That was enough. It had always been enough. Some stories don't shout, they whisper. They remind us that kindness doesn't need recognition, only consistency. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like, subscribe, and join our Heart Angels family, where compassion still matters and love is never wasted.